you are totally right. We're going to talk about OpenTelemetry and how that plays a role in monitoring and that kind of thing within .NET, obviously, .NET Conf, although I did catch the end of Pablo Conf earlier. So that was, I don't know if we've changed branding of the event or whatever, but if this is .NET still, I'm really excited to be here. All of you know Frank. Some of you may know me. My name is Jason. I'm at Datadog. Formerly, I was on the same team with Frank at Microsoft, and just really excited to be here and tell you a few things that we have learned about observability over the last few years. And there's this one tool out there that a lot of people are talking about called OpenTelemetry. And it is a little bit new. So I thought I would start things off with just a beginner level, entry level overview of what OpenTelemetry is, commonly referred to as just OTel. But OpenTelemetry is a tool set and a standard for collecting telemetry data such as metrics and traces and logs and even profiling. And the one thing that it is not, though, however, is it's not a monitoring or an observability platform. It's really just a method and a tool set and open source project to collect all that kind of stuff and then send it to someplace else. A lot of you may be familiar with a couple of other projects that existed prior to OpenTelemetry, one known as Open Tracing, one called Open Census. Those all merged together to form OpenTelemetry a few years ago. So like I said, if you kind of bucket OpenTelemetry into a couple different things, we've got collection. It's a collection of APIs and SDKs. It also has a lot of semantic convention aspects to it, which really helps us in a number of ways really standardize on how we collect and export and deal with a lot of this data. And then there's some tools that I'm going to point out as well. Now, for those of you who are diving or planning to dive into the OpenTelemetry world, there's going to be some vocabulary that you're going to become familiar with. And I thought we would share some of that, some different components of OpenTelemetry. The first one being the OTLP protocol, which is a standard that helps define the shape of the telemetry data. So that's something you're going to see tossed around a lot. You're going to become very familiar with that term. Semantic conventions, we've also talked a little bit already about that. This is a way for us to define a standard naming scheme for our common telemetry data types, and really makes things a lot easier for a number of reasons. When we get into the benefits, you'll see more of that. There's also the OpenTelemetry APIs, which help us define how to generate the telemetry data. There are language SDKs, which implement the specifications, the APIs, and the export of the telemetry data. There's the OpenTelemetry collector. We use this as a proxy to receive and process and export the data. And then there's a library ecosystem, which helps us implement instrumentations for common libraries and frameworks that are used out there around the world. And then last, I mentioned tools. There's a lot of other tools out there, such as OpenTelemetry Operator for Kubernetes, OpenTelemetry Helm charts, and a bunch of community assets as well. And another really important aspect of OpenTelemetry, for those of you who have played around with it, you're probably very familiar with the collector pipeline. So I wanted to introduce you to that if you haven't been already introduced to it. But the pipeline is broken down into four elements, or four things, I would say. The first one being the receiver. Receivers collect telemetry data from various sources, such as agents or libraries or other collectors. And then we also have the processors, which helps us transform or filter or enrich telemetry data before we do anything further with it. You can add attributes to it. You can remove sensitive data, maybe aggregate data before it then gets shipped over to another place. And then the exporter, which allows us to send the telemetry data to backend systems such as Datadog or really anywhere you want. And then last, the connectors allow us to connect pipelines together. So for example, maybe you want to have the traces pipeline and you can use a connector to send data over to the metrics pipeline. So those are the four elements of the pipeline when it comes to OpenTelemetry, and something that you do want to get familiar with, or you will become familiar with, I should say, as you start to dive into OpenTelemetry a little bit more. A couple other interesting facts about OpenTelemetry. It's the second highest velocity project in the CNCF ecosystem, and also the third highest velocity project in the Linux Foundation ecosystem. And at this point, it's an industry standard supported by over 40 different observability vendors, including Datadog. And as its adoption has been growing, it's been growing quite fast. And Gartner actually predicts that by 2025, 70% of new cloud native applications will adopt OpenTelemetry for their observability. So let's get into the benefits here, and then I think we'll switch gears and pretty soon here and dive into some of the code. Frank's going to show us how to instrument some .NET and actually, experience this firsthand. The first big benefit that I think most people talk about when they're talking about OpenTelemetry or OTel is the data portability aspect of it. Being able to have vendor neutral instrumentation and avoiding that vendor lock-in is a huge win for everybody, and that gives users, businesses, everybody the freedom and the flexibility to move their data around and try out different things and do what works best for their situation. Another one is the data flexibility, which is kind of related to that, where we can send metrics and traces to Datadog, and maybe logs to another backend, or maybe you're sending production telemetry to Datadog, but something else goes to another backend for visualization. And so that flexibility is nice. But also, the tool convergence is another big benefit of this. We can avoid setting up multiple vendor agents on the same hosts. We're going to spend less time spent on like in-house solutions and all the multiple instrumentation mechanisms that you might have. Also, cost is another big element when it comes to the benefits of using OTel. Cost control. This is something like using the pipeline that I showed you to be able to sample some of the telemetry data before you send it over to your vendor. Or maybe you're reducing the number of agents that are running in the environment, or maybe even removing some entirely. So managing the cost is another big aspect in terms of the benefits. And then the last one I have here is that there's just a lot of really great support for some of the more newer, maybe more modern languages that are out there. Rust, Swift, and Elixir are a couple of examples. So those are really the benefits, the big benefits that I think most people are talking about when they're switching to OTel or they're using OTel in general. And I think just a couple other points I want to put on this is that the goal of OpenTelemetry is just to make it super easy for you to instrument an application or a system, no matter what language, no matter what infrastructure or runtime, and then send that someplace so that you can do more with it and be able to make sense of your data and help your business. And so the storage and the visualization of that telemetry is then intentionally left to other tools. And maybe that's Datadog, maybe that's Prometheus, maybe that's App Insights. We're going to look at a couple options today. And you might be wondering, well, what in the world is this guy up here talking about OpenTelemetry when he's clearly from Datadog? Well, Datadog has a long-standing culture of active support in open source projects, and OpenTelemetry is one that we have a lot of contributions and a lot of maintainers and people involved with helping support OpenTelemetry. It's also, within Datadog in general, we're a very OTel focused team with a lot of guidance and advice around how best to use OpenTelemetry. And we're also just very active in trying to improve the native interoperability between OTel, Datadog, and really all the vendors and tools out there. So we're very big fans of OpenTelemetry, as you might be able to tell, and really looking forward to seeing how people use this moving forward and integrating with all the great tools that are out there. There's so much more we could go over, but I think it's probably going to be more beneficial at this point to dive into the code and let Frank show us how we can instrument some of the OTel things that we just looked at into our .NET. So I think at this point, Frank, I'm going to hand it back to you so you can walk us through a little bit more.
Wonderful. Thanks. So let's bring my screen up. Excellent. Thank you, mister. It's like having a little angel on my shoulder. Excellent. So we're back in the code. And while you're talking, Jason, I kind of like set up the thing already to save time. So Aspire is great when you're working locally. When you're developing, you have all the tools, you have that dashboard that really helpful to visualize the information, see the trace and things like that. You can deploy, if you want, the dashboard in a container in Azure, for example, in our cloud. It could be useful, but it's not the main purpose. Like there's tool like Application Insight, for example, in Azure that you could deploy, and that can scale. That's a production tool to be able to get all that telemetry and be able to investigate and monitor your application. Is it complex to switch your OpenTelemetry to Aspire, not to Aspire, to App Insight. Let me show you. So this is the code. I'm in the same solution. Remember, I told you. Let me zoom here. Obviously, I had my mouse in the way. Let's do this. Cool. So I have my app host, that my orchestrator, but my application is that weather hub and my API. And I have the service default that set a set of rules, connection, and things like that. And we'll change a few things in the orchestrator and the service default. So let's first start by the orchestrator. So in app host, I have a program, and this is where I declare, right? It's really the Aspire where I declare what I need and things like that. Because right now Aspire is already running, I deployed that. Maybe it's part of a global solution I'm using and things like that. I'm just saying, hey, I'm adding a connection string to an app insight, and I said that in my secret or connection string or like whatever you want. For me right now, I'm having it in my app settings. You do that. And then after this, you need to let your API and your website say, hey, I want a reference to my app settings. Use this. I just inject this, use it. And that's it. That's for the orchestrator. Aspire will make sure the connection follow and things and everything will be done. Now the part that we need to do is in the extension. So now we move to that service default. There's only extension file there that is created when you had this project. And there's already plenty of code, the best practices for retry policies and things like that. I know it's service default. I call that the smart default. And usually this block of code here is commented. And it says, uncomment the following if you want to use Azure Monitor Exporter. That's exactly what you want to do. So I just uncomment it, press that file, compile, it's running, and now the app is running. So let's have a look. Hey, guess what? It looks exactly the same. So I can click around, and now I have this. If I go in the dashboard, I still have my data, so I can still, like as a developer, see locally. But now, if we go into the Azure portal, App Insight, I already have deployed. I have all the code, by the way, to reproduce all those demo. I will share that at the end. So now we can see that I have the live telemetry coming in. It's the same call, the same trace we see here. And this can scale. That's the beauty of App Insight. It's up there with your app, and you could use it. And it's even, there's different tools where you could go and say, hey, I want to see the failures. I had one. Phew. Come on, show me that. Okay, there it is. So I can go investigate a little bit more, like having suggestion and things like that. I could investigate the performance of my app, like, okay, how long, which are that call took, how much time and things like that. So I could investigate, understand, and focus. Okay, we should really need to do this. This call takes 3 times more than everything else. Let's work on that. So that's how you do it. That was great. It was not complex. It's there, will be deployed. Aspire will package that if you need it with your biceps or your infrastructure as code if you need. That's great. If we go back to the code, I will stop my application and go back to the orchestrator, the app host. So that's great. We deploy in Azure, but sometime we want to use something else. Maybe another project is running, maybe the solution, or you have something, and maybe, for example, let's say we have Datadog. We use Datadog to visualize that data and would like to set up our application, our Aspire application, to send the telemetry to our Datadog dashboard. How can we do that? So the way it works is, let me switch here. Aspire work, no, well, Datadog, we have an agent running. So you could install it locally. I decided to have it in a container. So I have like my Docker Compose file here, and I'm just like getting the agent from Datadog, some configuration because we need to send parts and stuff like that. I need an API key, subscription, sending my data. This is, I'm using secret here. So that it's running right now on my machine. Now, if I want to change my configuration, what I do is an Aspire, I will just tell Aspire, hey, add the Datadog endpoint because the agent is running. There's an endpoint over there. So I'm saying, hey, I want to use that endpoint. And then just like we did with Aspire, we just need to add a reference. Whoops. This way. Voila. So now I'm saying like, in my project, add the environment Datadog endpoint, pointing that variable I created earlier, right? And we'll do the same thing here for my API. And let me start that, and I will show you after that while it's compiling. And the extension, we don't have to do much because there's here, say, hey, like use that exporter, OTLP exporter, and you specify to use the endpoint. That's it. By default, it's using the default exporter. And now you just say, hey, I want to use the that endpoint. Right now, the difference is if let's say I open the website and I click around, create some data. Voila. I want to click enough to have errors. Cool. So now if I go in the dashboard and the matrix and stuff like that, it's empty. Because the way it's done, you can send a OTLP to one endpoint. The way to broadcast to multiple destination will be to have some kind of repeater or like commuter. And I didn't set up that because I wanted to keep the solution simple. But if we go on the Datadog side, I think Jason will be able to show us data. So let's switch to Jason's screen. Okay.
Yeah, Frank. And before we jump into the screen, though, I wanted to just show off a little bit of how this is getting into the Datadog platform in terms of the agent that you just talked about. But we don't need to spend a lot of time on this because obviously we just looked at your Docker Compose file, a lot of good stuff in there. But I do have there's some documentation that's part of the resource links that I'll be sharing at the end that takes you straight to this doc that was very helpful for us as we started putting together this demo. So, but yeah, with that, let's just pop over into Datadog and see if we can see some stuff. Let me just change this to the last 15 minutes or so that we can see what's happened today. And yeah, so here, for those of you not familiar with Datadog, we're inside Datadog platform right now, inside APM. And you can see all the stuff that Frank has generated here from his application. A lot of good stuff that we can drill into each one of these and start to look at the flame graphs. Let's start over here with the flame graphs on what's happening. And some of these are probably going to have a little bit more information than others. So let me pick one that's got a little bit more to it. So this is a nice one here. You can see, at the top we've got flame graphs. We can switch it to a waterfall view, or the span list is also. Actually, let me drag this down so you can see what's going on. Span list is also another good option here. Click through just so everybody can see here. Now that I've moved that window out of the way a little bit. But what I like when I come into this screen actually is one of the newer things that I've discovered. Well, there's a couple things. Let me just start because we don't have a lot of time before we say goodbye here. Right at the very right in the very center here, this Watchdog Insights is kind of nice. If there's data in here, depending on what you got in here, Watchdog Insights will actually start to do some analysis on what's going on and give you some information that you can go in and learn more about what's happening. We've also got this area here which just puts the request, the errors, and latency all right in front, because that's typically something that most of us are interested in understanding if something's not going wrong, right. And then of course there's lots of ways ways over here on the left that we could filter, the data out and see what we wanted to see. But the thing that I'm in love with the most lately is this option up here. If we switch this to traces, we'll get a flow map that actually shows all of our components throughout this app that Frank has and how they're all talking to each other and where we might be seeing some problems. And as you can imagine, I can probably then drill into each one of these. But what I thought was kind of cool is I can come in and go to the service page and learn a ton more about what's going on with just this one particular service, this My Weather App API. I can see what's going on here. Over on the left, I've got different categories, so I could come down. We didn't set anything up for deployment, but if we came here down to the traces, we'd start to see all the stuff that's going on with your app and all the different calls that are being made. And now we're kind of back to what we saw when we first jumped in here, where we've got our flame graph. We could change it to a span list. And again, kind of choose your path on troubleshooting and trying to understand what's going on. We can jump into the logs. So it's all right here. And it was all because of the OTel collector, or in this case, the Datadog agent, which works the same way, sending all of the telemetry from Frank's application over into Datadog for us to visualize it and do more stuff with it. So that's just a real quick, idea of what that data looks like, the trace data and the metrics and all that kind of logs, all that as it comes into Datadog. But I didn't want to spend too much time on it. There's a whole bunch of other resources that I really wanted to share with you. Frank's got some docs and a blog, or I think this is maybe less of a doc and more of a blog. I've got some blogs that I wanted to share too that can tell you a little bit more about how this stuff works. And the other thing that I wanted to share that I thought was really helpful for me as I started diving into the OTel world is there's a couple of courses. They're free courses that we have on learn.datadoghq.com. You can go take those. They don't take too long. Give you a real quick overview of what OTel is, how it works with different vendors, and how it works in Datadog and all that kind of stuff. And so with that, Frank, I don't know if you've got anything else besides encouraging folks to go get the latest version of .NET, but I think that's all I've got on my end. And then we've got some links to share too. How about you?
Yeah. Just want to say there's a lot. Definitely App Insight could be a full session by itself. There was like all those things. I went pretty quickly through it. Same with Datadog, the dashboard. What I really want to emphasize is everything is possible because OpenTelemetry is a open standard. So it's everywhere. Everybody's using it. Aspire make it very easy to move from one destination to the other. Here are the resources. There's the workshop. All the demo I show and like way more are available there. So you could do like a step-by-step if you want to reproduce that at home.
Yeah, exactly. And I just shared the link that I've got here displayed. I shared that with our producers. And so I don't know if they can share it in with the chat with you, but if not, just visit. I've got a repo over on GitHub inside my account where you can go and get the slides. You can get all of the links to everything that we talked about today, the blog posts, the documentation. Frank's got some stuff in there too. And I believe we can get a hold of the demo, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And Frank, Bruno, everybody over there, I really appreciate you having me on. It's been a pleasure to be part of .NET Conf again.
It was awesome. I mean,